And the other thing I wanted to mention briefly, 9 out of 10 English learners live in low-income households. And that's, again, one of the reasons why we focus on English learners for this special populations webinar. As I shared earlier, most of our special population students experience economic hardship. So again, to help meet the need for Spanish resources and to help support our educators and our English learners, we focus a lot of attention on identifying the best resources available, equitably translated in Spanish. You see that here. These are all digital resources as PDF. And the links have been added for your convenience. So the list includes individual lessons, but it also includes diverse resources. We have games, we have simulations, excuse me. We have activities, all with a financial theme to support our English learners. And we also have resources for adult English learners that Amy is going to talk about.
Which we just had an awesome comment in the chat from Connie about informational materials, newsletter type handouts to send home to parents. So one idea that we love here at FEP to engage our communities, especially if you have a Spanish speaking community, which we know it can be a challenge in any community. It can be a challenge to reach out and engage parents past just that, conferences kind of relationship. So if you go to fep.org and you're on our resources page, you'll see we have a red arrow pointing to this top right box where you'll find our linked PDF for educators. And then the bottom is resources for educators and adults. And we would love you to consider this as sort of like a beginning space, a beginning hub of information where you could consider what resources might be useful to the parents and families in your community. The idea of having like a financial resources or financial information night at your school or within your district could be a great idea. It could be a way to provide some of these families with information and a safe space to begin building relationships with traditional financial institutions, which they may not have had experience with and may have distrust with. It could be a safer space to show the beginnings of taking or opening a checking account with both your students and your adults. And so partnering with local financial institutions or other interested organizations, that's also something we would be happy to help with or assist wherever we can. But I would really love, the hope is that this second link can be used to really start to reach out to parents. And of course, we want to teach the whole child. We know this, right? Especially our special population students. They deserve to be taught as full children. And in order to do that, we need to try and influence that teaching being brought back into the house. It also gives that opportunity to affect some generational change, which can be really exciting. We know that a lot of the information that keeps people, in economic difficulties is lack of access, lack of information, that gatekeeping kind of. So an event like this in a safe place like a school can really be an amazing way to connect with parents and community members. And in addition, with this next resource, we're going to share.
Okay, and this is part of our financial education library that Amy Cleaver has put together.
This is my labor of love.
It is a beautiful labor of love, you guys. So we have an extensive list of books that are, like I mentioned, they have a financial theme. These are children's literature, but honestly, they apply to middle and high school students as well. All students enjoy being read to. I'm focusing today on 8 titles that have been translated to Spanish. All of the titles have protagonists that are BIPOC students. 75% of the authors are also BIPOC. So we have a lot of cultural representation and diversity in these books. And that's really important because we know that when students see themselves represented in literature, it can be very validating. It feels good. You feel acknowledged and seen. These are all also virtual resources, and Amy she put a lot of work into this, you guys. So not only is the book available, but we also have read alouds that are narrated by heritage speakers. And every book has at least one lesson and or activity that is in Spanish. So one thing that I want to talk about briefly.
Touch on this part really quick with the community.
Oh, go ahead.
So this would be another great part to build into a community night, or honestly, any kind of, you have a literacy night. It can be any kind of cultural celebration if you're celebrating different cultures, if you're celebrating Spanish heritage or culture. This could be a great activity to do. We also have these books in hard copy, so please feel free to email us for that request. Like I said, there are also links to free YouTube read alouds, but you station a couple people around reading these books. The lesson and resource guides include discussion guides in English and Spanish when available. Some of these have parent guides in Spanish as well. So this is another great tool to use for that community integration.
Absolutely. And touching on what Amy just mentioned with parental involvement, a lot of parents often, they don't really know how to get that conversation about good financial habits started with their kids. And we know books are a great way to start any topic, to introduce any topic. And outside of the United States, a lot of parents, sometimes, honestly, they just don't have the time to sit down and read to their kids. It's great that they have read alouds. If they don't want to, they don't have the book in front of them, having that read aloud is another option. But it's something that goes back to just not having the time. A lot of our students, or a lot of the parents, are working and going to school, and showing this resource, tying it to what students are learning in the classroom, can be a great way to start introducing that other way of extending education into the home, from the classroom to the home, in a really fun educational way.
We also know that a lot of our special population students are responsible older siblings as well. So there is, an aspect of this that can be taken past just that parent-student relationship and really into any older student, younger student as well. I think in advisory, you could absolutely use some of these with older students to read, maybe a reading project with younger students, and get some of the learning done that way as well. I thought it was interesting, Milady mentioned that, like she said, it's not as common outside of American culture to do kind of like bedtime, read time, story time.
Right.
But it kind of leads into our next part, which talks about social emotional learning and the social emotional aspects of personal finance, because we both agree that the act of reading can be very comforting and nurturing to a student regardless of their age. It may activate some nostalgia that's there, or there might not be any prior experience to activate, but it can be a very calming, self-regulating time for students. And that very naturally leads me into the social emotional part of this presentation. So as I mentioned before, we are taking a very cross-curricular approach to financial education, particularly, across K-12, but particularly in the K-5 space. We know that the overlap between, or the emphasis on social emotional learning is very strong. Like I mentioned, we all recognize that we have gone through a pretty massive national trauma in the last couple of years, and the pendulum of education swings as it does, and we're firmly into social emotional learning now. We see the benefits in all areas of our students' lives. We know when we're giving explicit and equitable instruction, just like financial education. This is the beautiful connection for me. SEL and financial education touch literally every part of our lives, every day. We didn't get a lot of explicit instruction in it, and we're kind of expected, like you said, to pick it up by osmosis. Now we're giving that energy to that, like I said, explicit and equitable instruction. So I see a lot of connections between social emotional development and developing personal finance skills, right? For me, a great example of this is budgeting. Right. If you're doing personal finance, if you're learning about finance, you're more than likely going to have to do a budget. And to me, budgeting always drove me crazy when I was a kid, because it wasn't until I became a teacher and made this connection. Budgets always go wrong. Right? Budgets never stay on track. You can have a perfect budget, but something is going to happen and it's going to go off track. So yes, budgeting is about understanding your math and making choices about the opportunity cost and what you want to spend on, but it's also a real problem-solving skill, because you're constantly having to go back and reflect and adapt and change. And I think what I'm trying to say here is that we view financial skills as with the same growth mindset that we view our academic skills. This is a lifelong learning process.
Yeah.
Everybody makes mistakes with them. And it's how you react to those mistakes that's really going to make a difference in the skills you develop. So this resource here, this is a resource you will have receive as well. This is a starting point where we kind of lined up we call them the 5 basic personal finance behaviors. I've got spending, saving, lending, borrowing, earning, and giving. And we connected those to the 3 self standards that exist within the Washington State SEL standards. So we have self-awareness, self-management, and self-efficacy. And again, this is really supposed to be a starting place for conversations, maybe between educators and students, to really just sort of start seeing the connections. And it's very difficult, I recognize, to put SEL into the 9-12 space. That can be much more of a challenge than with the K-5. So this is a great way to start integrating, kind of sneakily integrating those SEL skills for our older students. Specifically, we know when we talk about earning, you know, over 90% of employers consider social emotional skills, communication skills more important than technical skills at this point. So we really are preparing them for a future when we're recognizing these connections.